The explosion of online property forums provides what might feel like a safe haven for first home buyers. But like most forums, they are rarely moderated by industry experts, so it can be a minefield of poor advice.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Megan, and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. And that's a good thing because between us, we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories and avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on.
We've got loads of free tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll get access to our free webinar, How to Buy Your First Home with the Right Amount of Debt. You'll also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to be educated home buyers. We have created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority or your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about questions we have seen on online property forums. You know the ones, someone creates a group that sounds like it is the answer to your frustration because it's full of people in a similar situation to you who are more than willing to share their experience. Now, what alarms us is how much of a hole people can put themselves in. So some of the questions, I guess, show those holes and some of the answers show how people could dig even bigger holes for themselves.
It's just, I get into them. I don't often participate in the forums, but I really want to know what first home buyers are thinking and how they're feeling about things because, you and I have this absolute passion and mission to help people do this well, to do things in the right way, to take steps in the right order, to feel like they're in control. But, this first one that I saw, and this is what started me thinking, geez, I really feel like we need to discuss some of these things, is our settlement is this week. Are we able to move in?
So this is the quote.
This is the question
actually
on the
question,
forum.
right?
Yeah. Our settlement is this week. Are we able to move in straight away after settlement if all goes well? Now, my heart went into my mouth to think, if you don't know, if you have not informed yourself at that point in time, you are so far through the process and you don't know when you can move in.
That's just alarming, isn't it? Especially because presumably, or forget the fact that they obviously don't know some fundamentals and clearly no one's told them anything. What's their conveyancer or their lawyer doing? Like, why haven't they given them any guidance?
Week in that person's post.
This
week.
Less than 7 days. So, you have to book removalists.
You have to organise cleans.
There's a lot to be... There's a lot to be done, and, but you're also not even... What? It's mind-boggling, isn't it? It's blithely, tripping along. Anyway... So the answer to the question, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Unless there is something in the contract that prevents you doing that, like a lease or a tenant in place.
True. That's a very good point. Or, so there's your settlement, and the only thing that has to happen after the settlement is that the lawyer or the conveyancer has to just notify the agent that they can release the keys. So there's that little tiny extra thing that has to happen after settlement, unless there is a lease in place, right? And then you can go and get your keys, and then it's your place, yours and the bank's.
Yours, yeah. Yes,
yours
the bank
and the
has
bank's.
an ownership interest in the property. That's entirely true.
Happily ever after.
But you don't have to have them live with you.
But it is rather alarming to think that you get that close, and They've not.
The sort of thing I would think that you would be preparing for is certainly when we teach people about the process in your first home buyer guide, the period between unconditional and settlement, there are still a lot of steps that you've got to do.
There's a lot of stuff to be done
to prepare for settlement. Now, whilst you don't participate in settlement, it's the banks and the solicitors that participate in the settlement of the property. There are things you need to do before, and there are things that you need to be aware of that need to be finalised afterwards. And to be a week out and not have knowledge of what is happening in that week and the subsequent weeks afterwards, just honestly,
scary.
It scared me.
Scary.
What else hasn't been done? What else could have been forgotten?
Well,
Checklist.
Okay. So if we talk about the process that we teach our students, there's 10 steps, 10 modules in this program, and in that there's quite a lot of meat, a lot of things you need to do. But the very first one is to get your support crew, and that support crew should be guiding you all the way through, right? And that includes the settlement period. And then the 10th step is the settlement period. That's what to do, exactly what you're saying there, all the things that need to happen. So rather than final week, mad rush, oh my dear. Anyway, the next question. Shall I read this one?
Yeah, that tickled me.
Oh, I'm losing hope. I can't see myself, in brackets, single 24, purchasing without another person to help. What do I need to do?
The first answer was in this forum?
No.
Single at 24 and losing hope. That is tragic. That's the first answer.
And I have to say, I feel a bit the same. I think 24 is not the time to lose hope.
No, you've got a whole life ahead of you. Yeah, we've got some students who are first-time buyers around 40 because that's just how things worked out for them, and that was when it was the right time for them to buy. So I think setting any expectations around what age you should be doing things is entirely, it's a little bit unrealistic unless it sits within a plan that you are working towards. But what do I need to do is, it's such an open-ended question. You should have seen something else, isn't it?
Go on Bumble?
Yeah. Are you asking about the dating side or the property purchase side?
Exactly. Okay. I think 24, it's funny. I mean, I go back to think of myself as 24. This is why we're old enough to be your mum. Life, there's just so much more to live than 24. And I know some people do think they're old at 24. I can guarantee you are not. There is so much more life experience to have. And you will probably meet a great person to have a relationship with. And you might, like we, meet more than one. Not at the same time, of course, consecutively. But what do I need to do? I would say, well, you know what you want to do when you meet someone, because you will, no doubt, at some point, you want to have actually started your own savings plan so that you are actually putting yourself in a position that, and hopefully you meet someone else who's doing the same sort of thing. So you've got some resources to put together and be able to buy property together. Because if you sort of lose hope and go, well, bugger it, I'm just going to go and spend everything, then you're going to, when you do meet someone, not have anything to bring to the table. And hopefully you haven't met somebody else that is the same, So I think, what do I need to do? Be patient.
But it's not, we'll have a plan too, because your plan might be, if I haven't met somebody by this date, then I need to explore whether I do a purchase with a friend, a family member, somebody else. Who might that be? Who would be potentially in a similar position? Who would enter into a contractual relationship, because all of these things have to have really good legal agreements in place when you purchase with another person. There are other options other than coupling up. And if you have some thoughts around that and you educate yourself around that and you put your feelers out, you might find that there's another person out there who, and it might not be that it's a property that you live in. It might be that you rent vest initially to get into the market. And you have a plan around, well, once the property has achieved these certain things, then one or the other might buy the other one out, or there might be an agreement to sell at a certain point in time if there's a certain amount of capital gains, or it might be that if the other person does meet someone and wants to exit from that financial arrangement, then you have everything written down and agreed before the situation happens. So you don't need a partner in life to have a partner in property. But you do need to be really eyes open, well aware, looking at all of the risks, having all of your what if scenarios outlined before you enter into the purchase, so that when a what if happens, you just go, oh, okay, well, the agreement says this is what we do in this situation. Okay, well, that's what we'll do in that situation. So there's lots of opportunities to get into property that doesn't necessarily involve having a life partner as part of the plan.
And I don't know what this person does for a living, but maybe there's a way that they could actually look at upskilling so that they have a more lucrative career path.
Income,
I don't
yep.
know, but there's lots of ways that you could look at. You're only 24.
Yes.
You've got heaps of time. Anyway, let's move on to the next one.
Look, this is from one of the forums. Found an apartment I really like, but the tenant seems very frustrated that they're going to be forced to move out once settlement happens. Should I avoid buying the apartment?
No,
No.
it's got nothing to do with it. No.
Is it a good property? Is it in your price range? Have you done the due diligence? Does it have good investment fundamentals? It's like saying, oh, I don't like the neighbours, so I'm not going to buy that one. You know, they might move out next week.
Well, yeah, it's sillier than that because these people definitely are moving out.
That's right.
It's funny that the things people focus on, it just shows you're focusing on absolutely one thing that might seem really problematic, but actually is completely irrelevant, and possibly not focusing on any of the things that you really need to be looking at, which is all the due diligence, the way the buildings run. Are there any special levies coming up? Are there defects? All et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a myriad of things that you should be worrying about before worrying about upsetting the current tenant. Now, I get it. The tenants will be upset, right? And I get that nobody likes being kicked out of a place they're living in because somebody, or the vendor's selling it and somebody's buying it. I get that. And I have sympathy for tenants who are a bit upset and frustrated. And also they're the ones having to suffer the inconvenience of showing the property or having the people coming through their home while the property's on the market. So there's lots of reasons why a tenant be very frustrated. But the reality is that's the last thing you should be worried about. And if they damage the property, if they're that frustrated, then you're buying it in the condition that there was at the time that you went unconditional. And so as long as there's plenty of documentation around that, then that's on the vendor, or to claim on their insurance. It's not your problem.
Yeah, I guess I would say also to do a little bit of investigation. Often it's on the contract. Is there a property manager appointed to manage the property, or is it privately managed? Because sometimes privately managed properties, so the owner managing the property without a property manager, they don't have all the documentation in place. They don't have the entry condition report. They might not have done routine inspections along the way. So whether it's the sorts of things that you would want to ask and find out so that you knew what your risks were if you did purchase that property, is it managed? Is there an entry condition report? What does the lease say? Are there condition reports? Who will be doing the exit inspection? So if the tenant has to move out before settlement, then is that a condition of the contract that it has to be vacant possession and that the property has to be returned in the condition it was when the tenant entered the property? So there is actually probably a few extra things that we would suggest that you do if there is a tenant in situ, but it is to be vacant possession. Now, if that tenant is going to be in there for a period of time after the property settles, so their lease goes beyond the settlement date, then you need to make sure you're working with the property manager at the time when it's time for that tenant to move out, so that exit process is done professionally and you get the property back in the condition it was when the tenant moved in. And that's the relevant thing there is, you talk about damage. If there's any damage done during that period because the tenant got a bit antsy, then it is the entry condition report when that tenant went in that is the documentation that you need to understand. That's the condition the tenant has to return the property in. Not what you want it to be in, but in the condition that it was at the entry. So getting a hold of that would be really valuable to know what condition that property was in and what it needs to be in when that tenant leaves.
100%. And I think too, what you say there about, the property manager, how is it being managed? I'd want to make sure it was in an expired lease, that there wasn't actually a lease in place and they're trying to pay the tenant to move, because some negotiations can be done. But the tenant has all the rights under those circumstances. So you certainly do want to just check that it is vacant possession, as Megan was saying. And also the thing too, because sometimes properties are sold with the tenants in place and with the intention to give them notice at the end of their lease. And you've got to be thinking, okay, I better check are they paying? How much rent are they paying? Because you will be paying the difference
landlord
between their rent and the mortgage repayments. And typically there's a gap there. So you're going to be out of pocket and you're not going to be living there. And the other thing too is that you want to make sure that they've been paying their rent on time. You definitely don't want to be taking on the responsibility of a tenant that is behind in their rent. So there are a couple of things, but it didn't sound like in this case
there was anything about a lease. By settlement or once settlement happens. So timing's a bit uncertain there. I guess from a risk point of view, the risk then is that the tenant doesn't move out despite the legal obligation to vacate the property. So that is something to keep in mind. That could happen, whether it's an owner or a tenant.
Yeah.
There is a long process to remove a tenant if they don't abide by their lease agreement. So that can be a risk, for sure.
Yeah, and vacant possession is great because that means it's the owner's risk, not your risk as the buyer. But if it's with subject to lease, then it becomes your risk.
Yeah.
So getting good legal advice, once again, having all your ducks lined up and all your support crew in tow, that can help in a situation like that. But generally speaking, just because the tenant's a bit frustrated, no reason not to buy the property.
Yep, absolutely. And there's a lot of investors who sell properties that are attractive to first-time buyers. So you would actually eliminate a huge amount of the market if, as one of the respondents suggested, don't ever buy a property that has a tenant in it. Not helpful advice, too general. You have to look at each situation on its own merit.
Love those don't ever buy one of them, don't you?
Ever.
Don't, except for us, we'll say don't ever buy off the plan. But even then, there's
exceptions to
small
those
exceptions.
Well.
There's exceptions to every rule, but anyone that says don't ever, you think, amateur.
Hang on. Yeah, let's just have a look at that. All right, let's have a look at the next question that was posted on a forum.
Yes, I am looking at buying my first home. If paying cash, what is the acceptable percent amount to cut off the asking price when making an offer? I don't want to offend the offers or offer too much. God love them.
Oh, well, do that.
There is this perception out there.
Free mini course.
Well, not only that. I mean, they can afford a buyer's agent if they're buying their first home and they're paying cash. They could afford a buyer's agent. They don't need to do our course. Because, our course is for people who can't afford to pay for a buyer's agent. So, it's like,
go and get some independent expert guidance and it's representation.
I don't have a lot of sympathy, but it's silly to think that your cash is worth more than the cash that comes out of a bank, by way of a mortgage.
It's just, a difference in a condition, potentially.
Absolutely. No, unless it's a absolute rotten buyer's market, awful, nothing is selling, and people with cash, they've got power because nobody can borrow any money. But that, even in the dark days of 2016-17, when the Royal Commission into Banking, it was never that grim.
Yeah.
Not in most markets. So I just, for anybody thinking that cash is worth more, it's going to make them more appealing as a buyer. It's just they've unless that owner is under so much stress and they need to get their cash in a week, it really makes zero difference.
Veronica, last week, so the previous episode, I'm sure you've all tuned in and listened to it. We talked about price guides, and there's a lot in this question that actually is really, if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I'm sure you've marked it. Go back and look at it, because asking price is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what the asking price is. Even suggesting that cutting a percentage, what's an acceptable percentage to cut off an asking price, it shows the point. A lack of knowledge about how to price a property, because that asking price may be exorbitantly overpriced. It might be smack on and priced to sell. It could be that in a rapidly rising market, that asking price is actually under what it's worth. So go back to the last episode and get your head wrapped around price guides and what to do with price guides, because knocking off 10% is the least sophisticated way of working out what to pay for a property.
I know. And also, just at the end point there is, I don't want to offend the owners or offer too much. And it is a fine line. Nobody wants to offer too much, right?
Most certainly.
Once again, educate yourself, and then that's unlikely going to happen. But I don't want to offend the owners. That is a fair concern, because some people do make such low offers and they just annoy the owners. And if the owners have a choice to sell to somebody else and they're going to give favourable conditions to somebody else, they will do that. Some people take it very, very personally when you offer what they perceive to be too low for their property. So work out what it's worth before you make an offer. Just do that.
Just do the work. Just do the work. But if you are paying cash, you should be able to afford a good buyer's agent.
Get a local specialist who's got lots of experience and they'll sort you out. All right. Next question.
Waiting for prices of homes to drop because it's ridiculous. But realistically, I need to be in my own home before March. Is there much point of waiting, or am I just fooling myself thinking it'll drop?
Yes, you are just fooling yourself. Even if they do drop.
I remember sitting in a sales meeting when I first started selling real estate agent. I'm sitting in a sales meeting and there's a picture on the wall and it's a skeleton and it says, waiting for the price of real estate to drop. Now, at that point in time, you could buy, there's been a resale recently, so that was 2001. You could buy a house for about, I think it was about 270,000 that has more recently sold for just over 1.2, I think it was. So I always think of that skeleton waiting for the price of property to drop. When people say, I think it's a bit ridiculous, it's a bit overpriced at the moment, it's not going in the other direction.
It never feels...
There's a little bit of a roller coaster sometimes, but the long-term graph is in an upward trajectory, not in a long-term downward trajectory.
No, there's the only exception to that rule, right, are places where the market is overheated because investors, for some reason, investors have all decided they're going to pile into the area, like mining towns, or back in the about 2010, around there. Mining towns are all the rage. There were heaps of people piling into
it was like
that
a
market.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? Like when
it's a Ponzi scheme.
Property expert says this is the area to buy, but they bought there before they told everybody else. So they get the benefit of the uplift in the capital gains while everybody else piles in, and then it sort of hits its peak and then peters off again.
Now that relies on the greater fool theory. There's always a greater fool to come in after me and pay more than I paid. And so, but at some point, the merry-go-round, the music stops and the merry-go-round stops. Some of those areas, I'm a little worried about Perth at the moment, because a lot of the reason for Perth's performance at the moment is a lot of people from the eastern states buying there, and that's come out in a lot of data. So I'm a bit worried about that, it being a similar sort of thing, that all these investors are piling in, and that's sort of tilting the scales a little bit away from the owner-occupiers, because the owner-occupiers are really what form the basis and foundations of a marketplace. So in most places, though, unless that sort of thing is going on, waiting for prices to drop is really waiting for you to realise prices aren't going to drop.
Yeah.
How long is it going to take before you work it out that even though there's some little dips along the way, generally speaking, the trajectory is up? And that's using aggregated data. I can sit here and pull out and tell you the facts and figures around this.
Yeah.
But equally, it's about knowing how to buy a good asset, because some properties do fall in value more than others when prices do fall. So, but the fundamental thing is you're buying for the long term, you're buying a good asset. There is no point waiting for prices to fall, because when they do fall, they only fall in a small proportion compared to when they're on a rising streak.
Yeah, and sometimes those B and C grade assets are the ones that fall as opposed to the A grades, which are more likely to hold or continue their growth. The other thing I just want to unpack out of that question is the time frame. So realistically, I need to be in my own home before March. You and I both look at this
6 months, not even 6 months. Then
by the time you take off your 45 days or 60-day settlement period, you're not leaving yourself, and then Christmas comes into it, New Year's, no stock during that period of time. There's about 6 weeks where there's no new stock. You need to get your skates on if that is actually what your strategy is, and stop waiting for the market to be in line with your expectations, because you don't control the market. Nobody controls the market. We've said there are some instances where there can be some influence on the market, but it's short term. But realistically, if you're giving yourself a deadline, you have to be very careful that you're not putting yourself under pressure, that you're concede to a lower grade or inferior property or make the wrong compromises to meet a time frame.
And this is just smacks of fighting with reality. It's like, one man against the market.
Our
the market will win.
Our lovable Mike from the Beta Group, who was waging a one-man war against the property market. And it wasn't until he finally went, oh, well, I've just got to join in, that they bought. And happily.
And I know. They've got a lovely family home now. All right.
Last one.
The next one is our last one. Oh, can I read this? It sounds so good.
Go for it.
Please excuse my ignorance. I feel embarrassed to ask this, but how does everyone buy a house? I feel like most people buy houses like you're never taught how in the process. I'm trying my best to learn and would appreciate any help. Oh, dear.
If only there was something that helped people learn how to buy houses. Look, it's so tongue-in-cheek. But
Did you actually answer this one, Megan?
Well, no,
did you say,
because in these
why don't you do
forums,
Homebuyer Academy?
In these forums,
What
you
do
can't
do?
promote your business, right? So I respect the rules of the forums. I don't go in there.
Problem.
I
for
do
us anyway.
respect them. But it is frustrating because you know what? They're actually entirely correct. This is not taught to people unless you can find us. So the challenge is how do we get more people to find us so that they are armed with the right information and feel like, okay, I've got this. I know how to do this. I know the right steps. This is the one that really hit my heart and made me feel like, oh my God, I just want to help you, but how do I can't tell you directly that I can help you.
It's actually really hard because that's one of the reasons I don't spend a lot of time in forums, because I know that a lot of the answers are really bad and I know we can help them. And, I sometimes will comment and sometimes will give them some, good advice in there. But the problem is, of course, it gets drowned out with all the bullshit and the ignorance and the I did it once and I'm an expert sort of answers. And I know it's hard. And so I sort of have to sometimes get out of there because I feel so frustrated that, that I, powerless to actually help. And it's like, and sometimes we've even approached the people that run these forums. Sometimes I have, sure you have too, Megan, to say, look, we actually have a program. Can we work with you? And that hasn't been greatly
it's not really
successful. No, because they actually want fundamentally
usually
they want to
different
sell
business.
something else.
Yeah,
they want to sell
business.
something else.
And sometimes genuinely good business, like really good brokers have some, I've seen some really good intended property forums. And what that broker can provide is really good finance advice. And that input that they give is really good around the finance. What isn't there is a holistic approach to choosing the asset and the process of buying the property. And I guess that's the thing that really tore at my heartstrings with this one, because when I read I am trying my best to learn, I just wanted to wrap them up and say, we've got you.
It was hopefully find us.
There is hope.
I mean, the thing is too, and a lot of the brokers, we've talked about this before in terms of free online courses helping people buy property. And this is probably what this person has found, that, they'll give you 7 steps to buying a property, 4 or 5 of those around getting the finance right, find a property, make an offer. And it's like, oh my God, they've condensed a very important sort of 8 steps, 9 steps even. They've condensed 9 steps into 2, which just assume that it's that easy, to find it. So you got to know what you're looking for. You got, all of that dealing with agents, working it, all that, the due diligence and all the bits between finding it and making an offer, all the stuff you need to do. And then how do you make an offer? How do you work out? And then how do you negotiate with the agent? It just makes me laugh. And it's not like I've seen one of these out there with brokers and banks as well, same sort of stuff.
Yep.
It's not one. It's almost they've all just copied each other's template. And I'm like, no wonder people are frustrated, because that is not good enough.
There's a lot of gaps in there. There's some good information, but it's not the whole story. And when you don't know what you don't know which gaps are not filled. And I think that's the thing that, certainly from our perspective in doing that brain dump of our experienced buyers agents to create this course for people, they're the people I want to get to. I desperately want to get to people like,
we want to help you,
like that person, like you,
like you listening to this. Now, look, a quick note: this course only costs $990, and you do get direct access to us every week if you want it. to help guide you through your negotiations even, right? So trust me, you will overpay a hell of a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out your first home buyer guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you've found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.